All right, it is finally time for the Ask Me Anything with Dr. Brett Steenbarger, and everybody knows her and loves her, Anne Marie. Anne Marie is a trader. You know her here. She's been all over the place. She's currently in Finland, and she's also the author of the trading book. Great to have you with us, Anne Marie. And Dr. Steenbarger, if you don't know him, you should. He's the author of several trading books, including The Psychology of Trading, The Daily Trading Coach, and my personal favorite, Enhancing Trader Performance. Dr. Steenbarger has worked with hedge funds, huge traders from all over the world. We are very lucky to have both of our guests with us today. Anne Marie, how are you feeling? Are you ready for the session?
I am so excited. Got my notebook.
Awesome.
Can't wait.
Awesome. Well, Doctor, if you have any comments that you want to talk about before we get started, and then after that, we can jump right into the questions because we have a lot of really good questions. And thank you all for providing all these great questions. This is going to be a wonderful session, and we're really looking forward to it. Doctor, any comments before we begin?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. You may have noticed that we are getting closer and closer to an election. And there's a fair amount of uncertainty as far as the projected outcome of that election. But that has created, among the people I work with at hedge funds, that's created some uncertainty. We see a lot of hedging with respect to, for instance, the VIX futures. And we see a lot of concerns about volatility going forward. So the next few weeks promise to be particularly interesting, and we could see some meaningful moves on top of the situation in the Middle East, which has been a real driver of crude oil prices lately. Whether there'll be expanded war between Israel and Iran, or both sides will cool off. And we're seeing quite a move today in the crude oil market. So a lot going on in the world that's impacting prices across different asset classes, different markets. I'll mention one other thing. It's on my blog site, Trader Feed, TraderFeed.blogspot.com. And the idea is a really important one, and hopefully we'll discuss it going forward today. But the idea is that learning is state dependent. In other words, we are most likely to make use of our learning if we are performing in the state that we were in when we learned the material. So what this means for traditional trader education and traditional trading psychology is that we're doing things all wrong. If I'm teaching people trading psychology when they're in a nice, calm, collected mode at the end of a trading day or on a weekend, or maybe they're listening to a podcast or watching a video, they're in a totally different state than when they're actually taking risk and seeing things moving. And so the learning doesn't carry over. It doesn't transfer. We need to learn in the states that we're in when we're going to be performing. This has profound implications for how we train ourselves.
That's very interesting, Doctor. That's probably why I've never been able to read a book by sticking it under my pillow while I sleep. You really have to be in the state of mind.
Yeah, you're just not absorbing it, right? Right. But it's a real challenge, and people hope that they're going to take classes or they're going to read material, and suddenly they'll become great traders. The classes give useful information. The trading psychologists provide useful perspectives. But in applying them, we have to do it in real time. which means that we can't just jump into risk taking and hope that what we've learned will automatically transfer.
Very interesting, doctor. Very interesting. So, with that thought, I mean, when you're speaking to a trading psychologist or you're learning something about trading, what would you say is the best way for somebody to put themselves to take what they've learned and then use that in a at risk or stressful situation? How do you take what you've learned and then be able to use that in that situation to help you learn in that risk type situation?
Yeah, so the analogy I used on the blog post, and if people look, they'll be able to read it in more detail. The example I used is learning to jump with a parachute. Now, so jump from a helicopter, jump from a plane, learning how to skydive. Well, I could teach courses in how to pack a parachute, how to deploy a parachute. I could teach classes, I could show videos about how to jump from helicopters. Then you get on the helicopter and it's time to actually make the leap. And how
You're
much of what
freezing.
I've told you is going to stick? You're going
Right.
to panic. So it doesn't transfer. So how do we train people like in the military? How do we train people to jump from planes and helicopters? Well, we start in simulation mode. They're tied to a line. They have a parachute on, but they are securely attached to the line, and they learn to jump from a platform up high, deploy their parachute, and if they make a mistake, the line protects them. And they do it again and again and again and again, and they simulate. And gradually, the simulations get more and more challenging, and eventually, they do it from a moderate height without the line, and then they increase the. Okay, so there's all sorts of simulation and all sorts of practice along the way so that there's lots and lots of repetition. Because if something is repeated, if we encounter it many, 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 many times, it loses its emotional control over us.
Mm,
If
mm,
I tell you a joke, the same joke, again and again and again and again and again, eventually it's not going to be very funny, right?
right.
It
Yep.
loses its emotional power. Okay, so that's what we want to do in training. So a training psychologist like myself can give some pointers about what to do in practice and how to do it. And you can try to apply it. And then if there are questions and problems, you can refine. Uh, but you can't just jump into taking risk like you just can't jump out of the helicopter without having a lot of simulations, a lot of practice beforehand.
But eventually, you've got to make that jump, don't you?
Eventually, and excuse me, and that's really the key word, Hogue. Eventually, so many traders are eager to succeed and eager to make money. They want to put the trades on right away. They want to take risk right away. And then they
Hmm.
wonder why they're getting all emotional. It'd be like if I feel a need to jump out of the helicopter right away, and then I wonder why I'm getting panicked. Well, it's not something I need psychological techniques for. I need to structure the learning process the right way.
That makes so much sense to me, Doctor. I mean, I was in the S&P pit trading one lots, and I got hit on a five lot, and the abject fear that came over me, is thinking that now, I'm used to trading one lots. Now I have five on, was something that it takes time to increase that kind of risk and that kind of that to be able to handle that kind of risk. I remember my hand shaking. I couldn't even write the trade down.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And eventually it becomes so routine that it doesn't throw you at all.
Right.
There was
Yeah.
a time when I was first learning how to drive a car, and it was very scary, right? And it becomes second nature. But it's through repetition, it's through routine, it's through practice, and many times, many times, the psychological challenges that people are having in their learning process is because they're not giving themselves enough time to practice and get familiar uh, and make it routine.
All right. Well, before we get into the questions, Anne Marie, do you have anything you would like to add to what we were just talking about?
It just makes perfect sense. It's sort of like a guy that comes up from AAA and he's got great skills, and his first day in the show, he walks four guys, right? And
Mm,
or he gets shelled. It's just it's a different space. So that makes tons of sense. It really, really does.
thanks, Anne Marie. All right. So for our first question, this is a question that I've seen a lot of traders kind of pondering. I know that there's one in particular that I'm really excited if he's here for him to hear your answers, Doctor and Anne Marie. So here's the first question: as a funded 20-year-old that's been trading for 4 years, now with a newborn child, if you were in my position, would you focus on day trading as your career, whether it be getting a series license and trying to work for a firm or look for other transferable skills in other industries? Having a child does change things.
Having a child changes things amazingly. I have five children, and it's it's not a linear function. Two are more than twice the work of one, and three are more than three times. And so it takes real time and effort, but most importantly, it takes real teamwork. And if you have a spouse who's also working and has other responsibilities, then it can be very difficult to maintain the kind of hours that trading often involves. And that's one of the reasons why one of the common issues that people bring to me when they meet with me is problems in their relationships, problems in their marriages, because the work of trading taxes that teamwork. So you want to be aware of that. You want to be sensitive to that. It can be done, but you really have to be able to pick up the slack for each other. I like the idea, and I'm biased because this is how I did it myself. I like the idea of having a full time job and a full time career while I'm learning trading and while I'm developing my trading skills. It takes so much pressure off. It also gives you a fallback, if the trading doesn't work out. And it takes the pressure off if you go through a period where you're not making money in trading. It's not all of a sudden like your family doesn't have money. So I
Mhm.
think there is some wisdom in what the questioner is asking, to have a secure base and then use that secure base to work on the trading over time.
Anne Marie, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's so much pressure in trading anyway. It's better to have something stable and then work at being consistent, because consistency or a lack of it is the bane of all our existence, right? And you got to get consistent in your process before you can go, all right, I'm just going to go jump jump right in. And I jumped right in, and it was really the worst thing for me to do because the pressure made me lose a lot of money. And so I would definitely say have a foundation, just like Dr. Brett said. It doesn't feel as exciting to go, oh, I am trading and I'm doing this, but it's the wise thing to do, I think.
Well,
And
as
good for the family. I agree with you, Anne Marie. Now, I should mention, in the world of finance, I work with hedge funds mostly, and people who join a hedge fund, they've typically had some training, but they join with a salary, and it's typically a six-figure salary.
Mhm.
And then they
Mhm.
get a bonus on top of the salary. That's how they can make a good amount of money. But that salary provides a cushion of safety and security that the average short-term trader would not have.
Well, from personal experience, I'm familiar with this. I was a local in the S&P pit. Got married, was making money, losing money, overall profitable, but I was certainly not the best trader in the world. And when my first daughter was born, I had an opportunity to step up and fill orders. So I became a filling broker, and that was a little bit more solid income, but it also kept me in a position where I was going to be able to trade alongside of that. Maybe not in the S and P's, but I was able to trade in the Nasdaq or other markets while I was doing that. So and I don't know if I would have survived being, a local trader or just an outright, speculator after my first daughter was born because it does add a lot of pressure. Corey, I hope that really, really helps your kind of decision making in that, and it's always a personal decision. And so, great questions, great answers, and hopefully a little bit of my experience will help you make your decision. All right, we've got a couple of kind of related questions here. I've kind of put related questions together. We have Stefan that is asking, first of all, thanking both of you for being here. My question is I realize that I feel fatigue after watching the charts for a couple of hours. Seems like my mental capital is gone and I feel mentally drained. This happens usually around 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but I still have things I want to accomplish since it's still early in the day. What is your recommendation to recharge my mental capital and to get some more energy to keep going? And the other one is can you share some techniques to reach and maintain a state of flow? How can I track this stuff for a measurable frame of reference? And anytime you're, then this is me talking now. Anytime you're getting tired, you're losing that potential state of flow. I've noticed whenever I was in a state of flow, the minute I realize I'm in a state of flow, I'm no longer in a state of flow. Doctor?
Yeah, no, great questions. In the psychology research literature, they talk about concentration being a muscle. And if we focus and focus and focus and concentrate, eventually we tire out that muscle, just like if we were using our muscles all the time in the gym, eventually we would become fatigued. So we all have those limits. And typically that's why it's helpful to be able to take short periodic breaks and breaks that really refresh you. It could be with social time. It could be by having a bite to eat. It could be by getting a breath of fresh air. But getting away quickly and doing a reset can help tremendously the concentration. Now, as I believe I've shared in a previous talk with you guys, I do work myself in the area of biofeedback. There are devices, the one I use is called Muse, M-U-S-E, that measure our brainwaves in real time. And it tells us, are we in alpha state, which is more in the flow? Are we in beta state, where we're more charged up? And we can learn in real time techniques for keeping ourselves in that alpha state, keeping ourselves in that zone. So this is something that can be trained. And if you look up, just Google neurofeedback or neurofeedback research, you'll see a lot of information about how to train the brain to get better and better and better at entering flow, but also sustaining flow.
Man, I wish I had that when I was younger. Because it's true. I mean, the minute you realize you're in flow, you're out of it. Anne Marie, any thoughts on this?
I'd like to ask Dr. Brett what he thinks about adding breathing techniques to, there's a lot of stuff out there about breath. What do you what do you think about breathing techniques at the desk? And, sometimes I do deep breathing. I end up hyperventilating myself. But how do you How do you incorporate that?
Yeah, and that's a great example, Anne Marie, of something you can do during a break where you just empty your mind, like in meditation, you empty your mind, sit very still, take very slow and deep breaths. And of course, what you're doing is slowing yourself physiologically. Your heart rate comes down and your muscle tension comes down, and you're also tuning out cognitively and giving yourself a bit of that rest. That can be very effective. Now, the ideas can be combined. So, for instance, you can do meditative breathing while you're hooked up to biofeedback.
Yeah.
It could be heart rate variability feedback. There's a site called Heart Math. It could,
Yeah.
which is very good at measuring stress levels. It could be the brainwave feedback that I mentioned, but you can use the deep breathing to actually see, am I getting myself in the zone? Typically, what happens, my experience, Anne Marie, for what it's worth, is that people do a few deep breaths and they hope that that's going to transform their consciousness. They don't stick with it long enough to really get the focus. It does take a little time, and it takes practice.
Doctor, we hear about the state of flow quite a bit. In your words, what is a state of flow?
Yeah, a state of flow is where you're so absorbed. There's a research called named Mihai, and he talks about flow as a state in which you are so absorbed in what you're doing, you lose the sense of time. Time just seems to pass, because you're just so into what you're doing. And typically that happens when we're engaged in activities that are of an optimal level of challenge. If things are too easy, we don't really get into the flow. If things are too difficult and frustrating, we certainly don't get into the flow. But when we're doing something that absorbs us, that speaks to us, then it's easier to become fully absorbed and be in that state of flow. The research tells us that when we are in that flow state, we tend to have more well being, more good feelings, good experience psychologically, but we also tend to be more creative. And so we literally can see things in markets better when we are in that zone.
Thank you very much for that answer.
Yeah, the
The
opposite of
times that
flow is being highly distracted, being very frustrated,
okay.
very distracted. That would be the opposite of flow.
So I mean, if you're having a hard day, you're losing money, something like that, you're probably not going to find the state of flow in that regard.
Yes and no, Hogue. It's really interesting. Even the best traders, and I've worked with some very, very successful ones. If you look at the hit rate of their trades, what percentage of their trades are profitable, it's
Mm-hmm.
not far north of 50%.
Mm-hmm.
They're really good at holding trades that become good sized winners, and they're very good about holding the downside on the ones that don't work. But if you have a 50-50 hit rate, you're going to go through periods, and you can calculate the odds, where you have 3 losers in a row, 4 losers in a row, and so forth. And
Mm-hmm.
so they are accustomed to that. They accept that. But even more importantly, they view the losing trades as potential education. This is telling me either something about myself, maybe I did something wrong, or it's telling me something about the market I'm trading. Maybe there's something I'm missing in the market. So, ironically, the losses could get them focused on what they're doing, get them focused on the market, and they could get into the zone that way.
There was a guy standing next to me in the S&P pit for a little while, and he would, he'd have a trade on. I could watch what he was doing, and every loser that he took, he would say, "Okay, good." And finally, I said, "Why are you saying okay, good?" after each losing trade? He says, "Because I don't view it as a loss. I view it as an opportunity to learn something. There was something I'm missing. I'm getting information from the market. I'm learning something from the market when my setup doesn't play out." And I think that's probably a good way to kind of turn that into a way to get into a state of flow. I mean, you can be down money and then find that state of flow, and then I end up having a really good day. You know,
Great point and example. Now, Anne Marie and I share an interest in spirituality and religion, and
as do
you know,
I.
good. And so when we have uh, beliefs, spiritual beliefs that put things into perspective, uh, it changes how we view what otherwise would look negative. So, for instance, if this is given to me as learning, if this is something that's going to be making me better, well, then I can feel grateful. I can say thank you. Thank you for this lesson. Now, no one likes losing money, but if that's an investment in learning and your development, then there's something you can feel good about, and it doesn't have to be a frustration.
There was a line Morgan Freeman said in Evan Almighty when he was talking to Evan's wife, and she didn't know that she was talking to God. He says, "What do you think God does when you ask him for discipline? Do you think that he just fills you with discipline, or does he give you the opportunity to be disciplined?" I love that answer.
Yeah, yeah,
Love that
that's
answer.
yeah, perfect.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next question. And I think this is one you're both really going to enjoy. Um, as a neurodivergent ADHD trader, I am only as successful as my last trade. I can't seem to get myself into that autonomous routine of consistency and discipline. If I break my rules, I will look back and wonder why I was even doing the things I know I shouldn't do. It's almost like I go blind, or that the wrong parts of my brain just take over, limbic versus prefrontal frontal cortex things. Whether it's boredom, dopamine addiction, or just not being able to do the things you're supposed to do, what do you suggest for other ADHD traders to combat these problems? Now, there's another question that involves dopamine. Can you make a comment on how lifestyle habits impact trading, particularly dopaminergic activities, and provide advice on how to lower dopamine baselines, which ultimate impact one's desire to be in the market?
Yeah, both really good questions. So I teach in a department of psychiatry at a medical school, and there is in our department a clinic that deals with ADHD. And so I'm familiar with a newer generation of medications that have been quite helpful for ADHD. If we don't have the right brain functioning, this is true in major depression as well. If we're not producing the right neurotransmitters, if we're not firing the right way, then it's just like, oh, I have a pancreas that doesn't work, and I need medication to be able to produce enough insulin to be able to regulate my blood sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have diabetes, I don't say, oh, I don't want to be on a medication, I should control it myself. But when it's the brain, we tend to not necessarily feel that way. But there are medications that are safe, they are not addictive, and that can very much help ADHD in general. And I've seen firsthand how they can help trading. So I would first off, as advice, encourage that person to get professional advice from a specialist and see what's available. The second thing is back to the biofeedback idea. We can train the brain, and biofeedback is one of the training devices that's used with children and young adults who have ADHD, because it teaches them how to focus. There's a fun app where if they stay focused, they keep they have like a bird in the air, and if they keep their focus, the bird keeps flying through the air. And if they increase their focus, the bird goes higher, higher. And if they lose their focus, the bird comes down and comes eventually would come down altogether. And so it's a great little game that trains people to keep their attention, keep their attention, keep their attention. So that's a worthwhile direction also. And asking a specialist about that is really an important way to go.
How much is dopamine involved in trading decisions?
Well, ideally, not much at all. Right? I mean, dopamine gives you that rush, and
Yeah, the feel good thing, right?
the feel good thing. And look, I mean, we're all competitive people in markets. We all want to win, and we do feel good when we win. But feeling good when you win is different than looking for a thrill. And if you need thrills in your life, then you need to make sure that they're being met in other areas of your life so that you don't have to use trading to get your thrills.
Excellent.
So yeah, so it's so important, because sometimes, and both of you talk about this a lot, sometimes the best trade is not to trade. Sometimes there's not great opportunity. But if you need the thrills, you need the excitement, you won't be able to honor that. So get the dopamine rushes elsewhere, and then you can use trading to make money.
There you go. Anne Marie, any thoughts and questions on these subjects?
No, I know this personally. I went through the University of Michigan's NeuroCore program, and what they did was hook you to everything. They put you on a television, and they're playing a movie, and they tell you to manage your breath. And if you don't get the right breath cycles, the film stops, and they record everything. So it's another, and literally, I was the only adult in there with all these kids. And it was just it's a great way for you to tune in to whether you have that, I'm going to call it a deficiency, but it's just a trait. And if you have that, then there are things that you can do to work on it. And of course, those medications are life changing. Personally, I can tell you.
That's
Thank you, Anne
great,
Marie.
Anne Marie. And let me mention the other problem, the kind of the opposite problem, which is more one that I have. There are some people who are wired in such a way that they need quite a bit of emotional stability. So if something is going to produce lots of ups and downs, really exciting, you could win, you could lose, or sometimes relationships, they can be full of drama. But I know how I'm wired. I don't like drama. I don't like drama at all. And so it's sort of the opposite of seeking the dopamine rush. And so for me, what is a challenge? A market that suddenly becomes really volatile. And now all of a sudden, there's more risk, more reward, and that throws me. And so I have to train myself to deal with that excitement or that stimulation as opposed to dealing with the lack of stimulation.
And how do you do that? What do you do?
I do two things, and this I've had to learn through hard experience. I'm very quick to size down if I see volatility rising because I want to keep risk and reward in a certain band given my account size. So I'm quick to monitor volatility and size accordingly. And the second thing is if markets become volatile and I don't really understand why they're acting in that way, I quickly exit. And it's sort of like the physicians saying, above all else, do no harm. You know, if I don't understand why things are suddenly moving around, maybe there's been a geopolitical event, maybe there's an economic announcement I'm aware of, then I pull back. So I control my level of arousal, my level of ups and downs with sizing, and my willingness to step back when things aren't right for me.
When something changes quickly, you're and you don't understand why, you don't know why it's happening, you take
Right.
yourself out.
That's
Just
right.
take
That's
yourself
right.
out of the situation
So
until you get
for
an
a trader
understanding.
like me, what's the greatest challenge? Let's say I see things setting up really well. Like we've been in a tight range and suddenly we're breaking out to the upside and increased volume.
Mhm.
I'm meant to go after that. I'm meant to size up. But I don't like all that P&L volatility.
Mhm.
So I've had to push myself in doing my own trading psychology to size up in a controlled way, but really practice to normalize that experience, because otherwise you're never going to make more from your wins than you lose with your
Mhm.
losses. And if you're around 50-50 on a hit rate, you won't make money.
Wow. One of the things I tell traders all the time is to try and remain centered, not too happy, not too sad, not too you sound like you're very centered.
At my best, and
Uh-huh.
but it takes centering because there's so much that goes on in markets. There's so much that goes on in life. We
Mhm.
had a question from someone who has a newborn, and so
Yeah.
you're trying to trade, and suddenly your newborn, God forbid, is sick. Well, my goodness, it is crying and crying and crying. So we can do everything we can to center ourselves, but life sometimes intrudes.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
100% true. 100% true.
Quickly,
All
Dr.
right.
Brett, that just brought up something that you said in one of your nearest posts. You talked about the muscle and the psychology of aggressiveness when you said, hey, the market's asking me to size up. Is that just something that how do you develop aggressiveness in the right spaces when you're
It's
when you're
such a good
trading?
question. It's such a good question. How does a boxer know when to really go after the opponent? For a good part of the rounds, you're dancing around the ring and you're avoiding getting hit. And you're trying to score a few points, with jabs. But then you notice that your opponent is wobbly. You notice that your opponent is hurt. And you're meant to go after that knockout. It's noticing that vulnerability. You can't make it happen, you can't predict it, but you have to be open-minded to seeing that and training yourself to go after it. And again, you do that in practice. Boxers practice in the ring, and traders can do that as well in their reviews and in their simulated trading. But you have an idea of when the market is setting up in such a way that you have a high reward to risk opportunity. Typically, in my experience, and I'm sensitive to this because I do work with financial institutions, it's an opportunity when bigger players are leaning the wrong way and they've got to get into a trade. So the bigger players have been short the market, and suddenly we get some news about the potential for a rate cut from central banks. Or the market has been short a particular stock and it comes out with a favorable earnings report. There's a catalyst, and the big players are offsides, and they've got to chase. They've got to cover their shorts, but they also have to accumulate positions. You can identify that in real time through shifts in volume. This is where relative volume is very helpful. And you see that the volume is increasing for that particular time of day. The bigger players are getting in, and boom, you can get right in and ride their coattails. And if you're breaking out of a range or breaking from a low, you can set your stop at a reasonable level so that your risk reward is good, even as you're sizing up.
Thank you.
So know when you got them and really go after them. You got that other boxer
it's so
wobbling.
It has to come to you. It has to come to you. If you try to make it happen, if you force it, then you're back to the dopamine rush situation.
Okay, that's something that we talk about a lot here. Is
you're going after a big win, a big win, a big win. You've got to be calm, and see the opportunity. That's why I use the analogy of the military sniper. You're sitting in the weeds, quiet, quiet, quiet. You're hiding. And then here comes the high value target, insight. And that's when you're meant.
That's when you pull it. That's when you go.
That's when you go.
We tell people all the time, if you go looking for trades, you're going to find them. But it's the ones that seem to come to you that always seem to be the better opportunities. I like the way you put that, Doctor.
Yeah, and that's because for really good traders, what's at work is pattern recognition. If you've seen enough markets on enough time frames, you see what's happening. You see something, an example that I've used recently in my writing, you see an example where you're selling off in the broad stock market, you're selling off in many sectors, and one sector, maybe the technology stocks, are holding up. You're not seeing a lot of selling in those. And you say to yourself, well, wait a minute, that shouldn't be happening. There's a floor under here. Let's see if the relative strength translates eventually into absolute strength. So you've seen that pattern play out again. And as it starts to play, you've seen it, you've been there, and you can go for it.
Awesome. There's a question here, and I think every trader deals with this to some degree or another, and we apologize. We won't be able to get to everybody's question. I've tried to kind of collect them into similar questions. This one really sticks out to me, and it's something that I've always dealt with. Pete sometimes struggles with negative self-talk, which of course impacts his trading. How do you deal with negative self-talk? What is the key to kind of building that winning mindset, or if at all, being able to quiet that negative self-talk?
Yeah, so this gets into what are called cognitive techniques that we can use to improve our trading. So let's use an example. I'm going to call on you, Anne-Marie. So you're trading, Anne-Marie, okay? And putting you on the spot here. You're trading and you take a loss. And I'm sitting beside you and I say to you, I can't believe you took another loss. How could you have made such a stupid trade? You keep doing that, you're going to lose your money. Eventually, you're going to lose your account. Now, what would you say to me?
I would.
We'll keep this to PG-13. What would you say?
Okay. I think I would say, you do you. I'll do me. I got you.
Yeah, yeah. That's very diplomatically said, by the way. um, Much better than STFU. But the idea, but the idea here, that's a stock on the Nasdaq. STFU, no. Okay. Anyway, so, uh, so the idea here is that you have to learn to talk back to your negative self-talk. If the negative self-talk were coming from me, Anne Marie would have no problem talking back. Hey, you do it your way, I'll do it my way. I've got to learn in my own experience. So she's pushing back. We have to imagine, visualize that our negative self-talk is coming from someone else. And how do we want to come back to that? Because if we can push back, if we can push away and not identify with the negative talk, then it won't dominate our trading. The problem is not that we have some negative talk, but we're identifying with it. We're absorbing it. We're believing it. That's a good word for it. And so we want to say, wait a minute, where is this coming from? Would I be saying this to someone else in this situation? No, of course not. I need to be a little more accepting of myself.
I think that's a good way to think about it. Is if you wouldn't say it to somebody else, you probably shouldn't say it to yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. And most of us have the social skill and sensitivity that we wouldn't say it to someone else. Just to be able to take a quick time out and say, wait a minute, is this constructive? Is this going to make me a better person, a better trader? So you're learning to interrupt the negative talk and replace it, not necessarily with positive talk, because maybe we did make a big mistake. Maybe we did do something wrong. You can't always be positive, but you can always be constructive. Constructive self-talk means learning from experience.
What would you say to somebody who, when it comes to negative self-talk, thinks more about feeling it and desensitizing the feelings from it, from feeling it deeply and feeling it and just letting it desensitize itself that way? Does that sound like something that you would agree with?
I wouldn't, because my leaning is to intercept it up front before it creates all sorts of negative feelings and disruptions in me. So right away, I want to be sensitive to it, just like I would be sensitive to it if someone is trading next to me and starts saying all this negative stuff about me. I'm going to tell them to be quiet. I need to focus on my trading. And so I want to be able to catch myself in that mode and tune that out. Now, it can be talk back to, well, yes, and that's what cognitive techniques are all about, right? I mean, if you look up cognitive therapy, and I've written some about that in the Daily Trading Coach, we can actually keep a cognitive journal where we replace the negative talk with more constructive talk. And so we're practicing changing our thought patterns.
So you take a trade and you go, your inside is saying, boy, you're an effing idiot. Why the heck did you take that trade? You could say back to it, hey, that's not true. I am not an effing idiot. It just wasn't a good trade. Maybe it wasn't in my process, but I'm learning. So you STFU and you be you and I'll be me and move on to the next opportunity.
Right. Because I'll say to myself, well, I will be an idiot if I don't learn from this experience. Now, let's go learn. What can I take away? If I did something wrong, or there's something in the market that I need to take into account, let's make this constructive. Let's learn from it. Let's use it to make me better. Then I'm not an idiot. If I don't learn from it, then I'm an idiot.
All right. Awesome. So most of these sessions are always going to include something about fear. And here's the fear section. Um, I've got a few people. I've kind of put them together. We're just going to kind of talk a little bit about what Test-Face, Steven, Ryan, Sean, Marcelo, and Vereen are thinking about here. So one of them is having trouble not holding on to winning trades long enough. Probably something a little bit fear-based. Increasingly intimidated by high potential risk and high potential gains, even in sim accounts. Biggest problem in trading is I hold on to losers way too long. How can I get better at cutting my losses? Fear of loss or avoiding loss. Been scared to take trades, even when they're the correct trades. In situations where you notice fear and greed influence your decision making. How do we manage those? This is a lot to digest here with all these questions. But there's another trader that makes money in a practice account, no problem. Every time they get into a funded account, they lose it within a couple of days. I kind of feel like these are all kind of fear-based outcomes.
Yes, and the latter is more of an example of what's called performance anxiety, typically, that once we have real money on the line, that suddenly, in practice, we can be okay. Yeah. And so jumping from trading on paper to the funded account and real time may be too big a leap for someone, and they may need to trade on their own with a very small account and get accustomed to the risk taking, move their way to going for a tryout. But typically, performance anxiety is something that we can overcome with the right kind of practice and repetition. There were a number of examples of fear that you gave with the questions, and each would be dealt with somewhat differently. But I'll answer in a broad context, and maybe we can get into details at another occasion.
Okay.
Many times, well, I'll give two answers. Many times, the fear is not just a fear of losing, but a fear of feeling like a loser. That we're fearing failure. And so we need to rehearse the mindset that losses are part of the game. There's inherent uncertainty in financial markets, and that our evaluation of ourselves is based on our learning and our growth and our development, not by our absolute P&L at any moment. So again, it's back to the cognitive approach, changing our thinking about success and failure, because if we can learn from quote unquote failure, then it's not so much of a threat. The other approach that I think I've shared with you is called a solution-focused approach. People have patterns of problems, and they come to someone like me, and how can I overcome this negative thinking? How can I overcome this negative pattern? In solution-focused work, we look at when problems are not occurring. When have you been trading and not been overwhelmed by fear? When have you been trading and you've been very constructively focused? And what were you doing at those times? So instead of trying to remove or lessen the negatives, you're looking for occasions when those negative patterns are not occurring, because the odds are good that at those times, the person is doing something right. That might reflect their best practices. So let's learn from the exceptions to the problem patterns and do more and more and more of what works.
I like that.
Traders don't spend time focusing on their successes, focusing on what they do right and learning from them, building on those strengths. And by the way, that's the topic of the book I'm writing right now.
Oh, awesome.
applying positive psychology to trading psychology. But we do things
Excellent.
right, and we're doing things right because it reflects our strengths, something we're good at. But we write our journals, we review at the end of the day, and we focus on the negatives, we focus on the losses, we focus on the frustrations, and that just
Mhm.
magnifies those. Let's look at what we did right. Let's look at our successes and learn from the best of what we do.
That's just more drama when we just focus on all the bad things.
I think. And again, we wouldn't want someone who's reviewing us to do that.
For sure.
100%.
Yeah. Good questions.
They very, very good questions, and thank you all for sending them in, of course. And as always, we apologize if we weren't able to get to your particular or specific question. I tried to bring them into groups so that if we didn't get to your question, at least you'd have a little bit of touch on what you were talking. Anne Marie, would if you have any other last questions or thought thing before we go. You've been just kind of hanging around, quiet, listening, and I'm just wondering what else you have to say, or if you have any thoughts.
You know what? I just love listening to Dr. Brett because he brings things to the root of the problem. He doesn't dance around
Hmm.
anything. He just goes "Phew," and comes right in. So it's been my joy to listen. And that last piece that you said about focusing on that positive, you end up feeding that dog. He's going to grow bigger than the other
Hmm.
one, right? And so, no, I've loved every minute of it. I always soak your stuff in. I'm a voracious reader of your blog and
Thank you.
your other posts. And I'm just so happy I got to spend the time with you. And you too, John. But I get you more than I get in. So there you go.
Well,
Well,
I
we
appreciate
are.
it with both of you.
Well, we really appreciate you, Dr. Steenbarger, for coming and hanging out with us again. We always look forward to this. We look
Sure.
forward to the next time
Yes.
that we have you with us. And any last comments, any encouragements you can give us before the end of the session?
Anne Marie, you go first, and then I'll respond.
um, the great thing about this is it's recorded. So go back and listen. And Dr. Brett dropped some really clear nuggets of stop, listen to yourself, watch what you're doing, learn to have a repeatable process. So many things he talked about over and over again. And when we listen to things the first time, we're engaged, it's interesting, but the teacher appears when the student is ready, and that's very often after the third and fourth and fifth time. So watch this again. He brought I got a whole page of notes. So I'm going to be watching it again too.
Well, thank you very much, Anne Marie. And I want to focus on something you just mentioned, reviewing, and just even one takeaway that speaks to you in
Yes.
what's been discussed. The research in psychology tells us that we learn to change, we change most effectively if we have a limited number of goals and work on those intensively. So don't try to change everything all at once. Take one thing at a time and work on it every single day. And so, whenever you have a coaching session, whenever you have a class, whenever you have something like we're doing here today, one takeaway that you're going to work on and work on and work on that's going to make you better, better, better. You do that each week, each week, each week. And my goodness, the compounding value of that is going to make you better, better, better by the end of the year.
100%.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think some of us call that uh, suck a little bit less tomorrow.
That's right. I love it.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. Got your books here. I've read them
Thank
both. Got to read them again. What a great session. Thank you again, Doctor, for being here. Anne Marie, always a pleasure. Thank you for being here. Stick around. We've got Shoulder Tap up
Pleasure.
next with Jack and Mick.